Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here to discuss the camp notes from August 2nd, 2023. Back to practice and no pads today. Back to some of that brother-in-law play we're familiar with in camp. Not as hot today, which is nice. That's definitely a much cooler day than the mid-90s we've been having. A lot of veterans had the day off today. Some of them still showed up. They're doing lifting, doing other work in the building, maybe going to the classroom sessions. But they showed up actually in uniform to support their teammates on the field without actually participating in a lot of cases. So Ronnie Stanley, Kevin Zeitler, Morgan Moses, Pierce, and OBJ were all among those. I didn't notice any others. It's not impossible that there would have been. Marlon Humphrey was in uniform today. Start with the offense, talk a little bit about them. They looked okay throwing the ball around without contact today. I would not say it was their best nor their worst practice. They definitely had some nice long completions. Looked like ball accuracy was very good today. So this is something in past Ravens camps that has been an issue, is that the ball's just all over the place. It's 10 yards over the head of the receiver, sometimes caused by the defense, other times not caused by the defense, and the ball's just wild all over the place. Not the case at all here. The balls were largely on target, whoever the quarterback was, and a few instances where that didn't occur, but largely on target. In terms of participation today, had all the PUP and NFI guys were not there. That's still a significant number of players. J.K. Dobbins, Patrick, Ricard, Rashad Bateman, Andrew Voorhees is still out, of course, Tyus Bowser, Trayvon Mullen, and Nick Moore. So you have all those guys are still out. And you had a couple other guys who had vet days off, but other players all showed. The only guy who was not there was David Ajabo, who was notably absent. Might have had some sort of an injury in the previous practice. Did not seem serious. The hope was he would not be out long, but he was not there today. So he was the only real notable absence of the people. Geno Stone also out in what John Harbaugh has estimated might be about a week that he'll miss. So largely the group is there. The group they expect to be is there. And it was a day where the absence of the vets that I mentioned, specifically on the offensive line, allowed for some new matchups, some new position shifting to be seen. And we saw some of that. Obviously, we'll talk about that. The big news in terms of an injury during practice is Rock Ya-Sin left practice with some sort of injury. John Harbaugh did not have an update at the podium, but he said it didn't look too serious. And if you had to predict any particular exacta of possible things, it would be John Harbaugh did not have an update, and he said it did not appear to be serious. Almost always that's what you get. Delshon Phillips at one point came up limping during practice. He didn't end up leaving. He had, as we'll get into a little bit later, a fantastic practice, made a couple of really big plays. All right, so we're on the wide receiver side of the field, and so watched a few of those drills to start off practice. Some interesting stuff that goes on. I like to talk about individual drills a little bit, as long as they're not giving away any scheme for the team. I think that's usually fine. But they do a hard press release drill where he and an assistant really try and jam the wide receiver off the line of scrimmage with the shield pads. And wide receiver has to try and work his way through contact, obviously, and not get disrupted in terms of his route. They do another drill, a stop and go drill that's generally led by Keith Williams. They're doing it on both sides of the field, where the wide receiver coach, Keith Williams, kind of drops into a crouch, and then the receivers have to quickly decelerate opposite him and then go again when he stands up. It's kind of a Simon Says routine they're putting on, but it's effective, hopefully, at training some of those deceleration techniques that are so important to receivers to get separation. They did a little bit of a rub drill. I asked Harbaugh about this during the questions. I cannot remember the last time I've seen the Ravens run a rub drill. Now, you think around the AFC North, And the Steelers, to a lesser extent, the Browns and Bengals run a lot of pick and rub concepts. They run a lot of bunch formation. They try and rub and pick free their receivers an awful lot. Honestly, that's not something that's been a huge part of the Roman offense scheme. And one issue is that bunch formation probably takes you away from some of the strengths of run game. Run wide receiver blocking in the run game and whatnot. So maybe it's there. I could come up with other reasons why it might be true, but I just say it was never that big a deal within the Roman scheme. The last time I remember seeing a big rub play by the Ravens was Jeremy Macklin's touchdown catch in that 20-0 win on opening day against the Bengals, which was all the way back in 2017. So it was actually in the pre-Roman era. And honestly, just not a lot of it since. And, I'm not saying none. Harbaugh did say they run the drill every year. I don't know if that means they run it every year, once a week, or every year, once every 2 weeks, or what it means. But I just can't remember the last time I've seen it. So I haven't been there every day. So that's that may be just the case. In terms of the wide receivers, I'd say that Devin Duvernay was a guy who really stood out today as gaining more of Lamar's trust, more of a connection, obviously, between those two as they threw some good balls. Duvernay was finding space. He was good at back shoulder plays. It did a number of things well, I think, in this session. One of the other things that Duvernay brings this team that is in short supply with the other receivers is really good hands. So Duvernay is certainly much better as a hands player than a lot of the receivers that the Ravens have had in recent years, where it seemed like they don't even really care if the player has a bad drop rate or not. But he's going to be a guy, I think, that if he's to build Lamar's trust, he needs to maintain those good hands. I think that's one of the things. I think it's also possible because we see a little bit of rub practice. If we see some rub routes, Duvernay and Flowers are both fantastic players to get free in space off a pick play. And they're very dangerous after the catch, both of them with their speed. And it just seems like that ought to be a part of the Ravens offense. Harbaugh also had that to say with regard to passing more, is that the more you pass, the more you want to have all the tools in the toolkit, not exactly those words that he used, but in order of having pick and rub routes. So hopefully we see a little bit more of that with some of the weapons the Ravens have this year. Nelson Aguilar, a guy who deserves some mention specifically. Now we're going to get into one-on-one drills and some of the results of that. And that's all wide receivers and defensive backs making plays against each other. But this, I think Nelson Aguilar was an interesting one because in an 11-on-11, he tipped the ball to himself for a touchdown. It was about a 15-yard play, I believe. And he really looked good today. He's looked good the last couple of times I've been there. And it's something that, I think maybe he's a bigger part of the offense than I'd originally anticipated. And certainly with the absence of Bateman still continuing, I think that there is a pretty good chance that Aguilar is going to be one of the beneficiaries of that in terms of more playing time. Let's talk about the one-on-one drills I just mentioned, because that was, one of the hotly contested things. There's only certain things you can do without pads that can be particularly hotly contested. So they did a little one-on-one drills with the offensive and defensive line that in some ways I'm sad I didn't take a look at that instead. But the one-on-one drills for the wide receivers and the defensive backs, I think showed some real things up. And I'm just going to go through some of the results individually. Makai Polk out-muscled Caillou Blue Kelly for a ball on a short cross. It was one of these cases where he definitely just wanted it more, and he bodied up Kelly slightly and took the ball away from him. Zay Flowers had 3 matchups with Kayvon Seymour. Now, if I were Kayvon Seymour, Zay Flowers is not the guy I'd be trying to cover. But I guess you kind of high risk, high reward. You want to get in there. So he covered him once. He got bitten off very sharply on a 15-yard in-breaking route where Flowers basically left him headed towards the sideline on an in-breaking route. And huge separation on the play, easy catch. The crowd, was very excited about that particular catch, and it looked great, frankly. So Seymour lines up against him again, and the next completion is 20 yards, back shoulder on the right sideline. And again, that's a matter of Flowers is selling something different. Seymour didn't have his eyes completely on the football, but always very difficult to stop a back shoulder throw against any receiver, and somebody with real quickness to be sudden enough to come back for the ball, whether or not they're throwing you some sort of a move. Very, very difficult. Derek Mason, of course, the classic hitch route runner for the Ravens in terms of a guy who could come back for the football and the ball would be there right on target from Joe Flacco, and Mason, and he had a real connection doing that. It's easy to see that could be something that an athlete like Flowers, who is so sudden, could do well, even if his route running does not dramatically improve. Now, we've identified that for Zay Flowers, improved route running is an enormous possibility of improvement. It's great to have that in a first round wide receiver, that there's still an area of growth available to them. But anyway, the back shoulder, I think it will come very natural to Zay Flowers at the NFL level. Anyway, Seymour lined up for him with him on one more rep, and he immediately grabbed Flowers at the line of scrimmage. Flowers could not get off the coverage. Now, it probably was a hold in this particular case because it was fairly egregious, but the entire defense rallied up to congratulate Seymour on the rep after that third one. So anyway, very good on him for wanting to face Zay and at least beat him once in terms of that matchup. Arthur Mollett, the newly acquired slot corner, the former Steeler, had a nice recovery play for an interception in coverage of Tylan Wallace. Now, this plays in the middle of the field, about 10 yards, right between the hashes, and Mollett appeared behind on the play, and then he accelerated through the point where the catch would have been made, which tells me that the ball was probably a little bit behind Wallace, and Wallace had to slow for it. That allowed Mollett to recover, drive through that spot, and looked like he had terrific speed doing that, but also after he caught the football, taking off and really has more speed than I thought he did. Anyway, looked very good on that play. Brandon Stevens was in coverage of James Prochet on a ball deep down the right sideline. Prochet caught the ball over Stevens, and it's it's kind of like dunking in somebody's face to do this. And obviously the defender does not have the same ability to go after that football that they were during the regular season. So it's not necessarily a win under any circumstances. It's a win under these circumstances. Stevens went to the ground, and Prochet, after the catch, went over and helped him get up. And that's you're hitting for the cycle when you do that for a receiver. You go up, you get to the football first, you haul it in, you secure it, and then you help the defender up. That's a grand slam right there. So nice play by Prochet there. A couple of nice plays from Tariq Black today. So if you want to keep an eye on him, or if you happen to be out there at practice yourself, he's number 81. He beat Jeremy Lewson 30 yards down the left sideline on a play. And then he also went up for a 25-yard catch down that same left sideline, covered by Jalen Armour-Davis. Now, Armour-Davis, he is not particularly good at finding the ball in the air, and that's a problem that several of the Ravens cornerbacks have this year. Is they don't have those obvious ball skills that they had with Marcus Peters in the past, or that if they had gotten Emmanuel Forbes, how exciting it would be about his ability to find the football in the air. They really just clearly don't have that guy this year, and Armour-Davis couldn't find the ball. Black also went up for that play and made it again. That was about a 25-yard catch down that left sideline. Nelson Aguilar beat Ardarius Williams 20 yards downfield with a very physical move. This is something that I think Ardarius Washington's going to have some trouble with. So far in camp this year, I haven't seen a lot from him. So I wonder exactly where he is in the competition for, say, slot corner, or even to make the team as a safety, potentially. It seems like if I had to handicap it right now, I'd kind of say he's a long shot, but we'll see how the camp progresses. And in particular, he's been a great preseason performer. So when contact really comes together in those games and the rubber hit the road, we'll see who Ardarius Washington is again. Daryl Worley, been playing a lot of safety this year, obviously in one-on-one drills. He was just covering Sean Ryan, number 82. At the line of scrimmage, he bullied him, just bullied him. And then they attempted a 5-yard throw to him between the right hash and numbers, and he knocked it right down. So Daryl Worley using his size and length very effectively in press coverage. Nice to see that, by the way. Nice to see a truly well-played press coverage and how that could impact things, in a real game if you need Daryl Worley to come in on the outside. And like I said, he's been playing a lot of safety this summer, but I don't think he's completely out of the Ravens' cornerback plans. I think it may be more a case of they need some additional guys to play safety for a second and third team, and he's just one of them. It could also be a versatility thing where they might use Brandon Stevens in the slot, and then they need an additional corner, in which case Worley could be the perfect choice as also a flexible player. So I think that would be another reason why he's seeing time there. Corey Mayfield, a name we haven't heard a whole lot, but he was the Ravens, I think, 5th-round draft pick, if I had that correct. He had a pass defense on Prochet as well. And Aguilar finished the drill by beating Humphrey 30 yards down the field on the left sideline. Beautiful toss. Aguilar went up and got the football, and Humphrey did not contest him for it. He was a little bit behind. Obviously, if you see defensive backs not contesting the football, they're doing the right thing. Risking injuries in the preseason is not a good thing, and nice to see Aguilar make that play anyway. Let's move on and talk a little bit about Lamar Jackson. He seemed to have pretty good touch on the ball again. Continues to show some zip on the football. And John Harbaugh was asked about this. Velocity by eye, I would say, is fairly good. But John Harbaugh was asked about it in the interviews, and he said, yes, they measure velocity in these training camp sessions. And he had also passed the test there that the velocity is good and is borne out by the numbers they're seeing there. Lamar did have a very difficult set of situational drills. It looked like it might have been a 2-minute drill, but they didn't have the clock running as they often did. So whatever, it's a situational drill. We'll just say that of some sort. And the first time on the field, there was a run play. The first play, the second play, he threw an interception to Marlon Humphrey. So Marlon's big play of the day for sure. And then the next opportunity, the ones come out again. They actually just take the ones off the field at that point, put the twos on if they give the ball away in that manner. So it's something where the ones actually lose reps to the twos because of some poor play there. But anyway, they came back on the field for a second opportunity. Lamar threw 3 consecutive incomplete passes, 2 of which were 5-yard throws, one to Duvernay, and one to Edwards, and sandwiched between those was a throwaway that was forced due to pressure. So defense kind of having their way with Lamar in that particular situational drill, even though Lamar looked pretty good. They're just throwing the ball around in the other 11-on-11s and some of the 7-on-7 that we saw. The offensive line. Okay, so this is where a lot of the changes occurred. So you have Stanley out, so McCary is with the ones. Sala and Linderbaum retained their places at left guard and center. Simpson was in at right guard for Zeitler, and Falalele in at right tackle for Moses. So a considerably different first-team look. I think it's nice to see both Falalele get some time with the ones at right tackle, so he's facing somebody who's a little bit ahead, even though Ajabo was not in the game. Ajabo was not at practice. Is one of the players who he would have faced at right tackle. He's been playing a lot on that side. Either one could, but he's the more likely to. And Simpson got an opportunity to play first team right guard in this game. Now, Simpson had been previously a second team left guard with those first team reps going to Sala pretty much from OTAs on. So Simpson, a 4th-year player, and Sala, a rookie. Just in terms of some franchise building theory, it's obviously a better choice, all things being equal, to give that job to a rookie rather than a 4th-year player, because your rookie can do a lot more for you over 4 years of team control as opposed to your 4th-year player who you're going to lose in a year. So not only do you prefer to give that job to a rookie, you're very heavily financially incented to do so, and you also gain insight into what sort of player he is. So as long as the move is not irreversible, and I think John Simpson will clearly make this team as at least a backup lineman, then you still have the opportunity to change back and let Simpson play there for the rest of the year at some point. So it is one of the things that really weighs in Salah's advantage is the Ravens' current financial picture with their cap situation over the next few years lends itself to thinking about what cheap opportunities exist. And that is the case at both guard spots. Presumably next year, potentially Andrew Voorhees at right guard, a monster of a man who had 38 bench reps with an Achilles tear, or Achilles tear or ACL, whichever it was. But anyway, bench reps without your legs, without one leg is pretty darn impressive. And he's had 38 of them. That's one place where they could save money. They could also save money at left guard, obviously, with Salah, and not trying to go to the market and probably drafting or finding another UDFA player as a backup for next year. But the Ravens will be hard pressed. Every financial decision they make will need to be looked at closely in order to maintain a competitive team while Lamar is on this cornerstone contract for quarterbacks and is at least until recently the highest paid quarterback in the NFL. I think Herbert might have passed him by a couple of $1 million in total. All right, so the big bombshell was dropped during interviews, and John Harbaugh said, talking about Salah, and a lot of the questions are about Salah. If you probably 20% of the questions during the interview sessions to all players, with Joe D and Ronnie Stanley, Tyler Linderbaum, and John Harbaugh on the stand, were relative to Salah. And the big bombshell that was dropped was that next week they have a planned flip where Simpson will go to the ones and Salah will start practicing with the twos. So just an opportunity to see a different set of players there. So we'll get some better clues, I think, from usage during the preseason games as to how these guys may line up during the regular season, because the order of entry during preseason games very indicative of how they feel about certain players. So in particular, the guys that keep bubble wrapped, that they almost play none in the first preseason game or in any of the preseason for that matter, or maybe they play a series, those guys are almost certainly starters. So we saw, even though Ben Powers started at right guard last year in the preseason, they still were only playing him for one series at the beginning. Very strong indication that he was still going to be their starting left guard at that point based on that. Obviously, the media is still making a big story out of the fact that there's a left guard competition going on. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the interviews. It was a much lower contact practice in terms of what was going on. The defensive line made a couple good plays. I would say that, but I did not watch the one-on-one reps with the OL and DL because I was watching the one-on-one reps with the wide receivers and defensive backs. I think there's generally more interest in that. But for me personally, I love those OL DL one-on-one reps, and to miss those is kind of a bummer. Anyway, that's all I have for the offensive line today, other than what we'll get to in interviews, and there's some interesting tidbits there. Of the running backs, Melvin Gordon had a nice burst on one into L2 on one run play. So first of all, it's probably a fairly well blocked play, and I did not watch lineman by lineman exactly how that hold developed. But Gordon took advantage of it, got into level 2. He unfortunately did not otherwise have a good day holding onto the football. So he had a drop on a short pass to the left. He also had another fumble, which caused a big scramble near the goal line. And I thought it might have gotten physical and confrontational, but fortunately it did not. Both sides kind of walked away from it. But the ball was on the ground. A lot of people are scrambling for it, and both offense and defense had a lot of bodies in the melee looking to come away with that football. So good that they were able to easily get away from each other without any sort of a fight developing there, because it's hot. Football players are contest things. They are physical, and they often get into fights under these sets of circumstances. I think it's been rare that we haven't seen a couple of pushing and shoving matches. in a practice, or one at least pushing and shoving match in a practice. And then usually something like that breaks into something a little bit more, like a harder shove. Somebody gets pushed to the ground, somebody throws a punch, at least once or twice per camp, I would say. So this was the main risk of it occurring today, and honestly came up pretty well. I think the Ravens in particular this year, I'd say more than even in past years, done a very good job of taking care of each other, of trying to make sure that players on the other sides are not getting hurt. And maybe an unscored practice helps with that. They did not appear to have the offense versus defense scoreboard going today, which is something that creates an additional competitive fire that can lead to some bad things, some good things also, but sometimes some bad things in terms of that physical conflict. Anthony Brown, obviously he's not getting a ton of reps at this point, but he ran through a gaping space in the defense for a touchdown. They left him alone. He just said, "Oh, I'm running for a touchdown." It was on a bonsai field goal drill, so they had to get Tucker on the field to kick a field goal as quickly as possible. And they weren't really looking for Brown to run a touchdown. They were looking for some sort of pass play, and that's just the way it worked out. Moving over to the defense, Del'Shawn Phillips was the star defender of the day. He knocked the ball free from Mason along the, I always have to call it the left or the right sideline here, but I think this was on the right sideline from the offense's point of view. The play was nearly over, and it looked like a short completion, and he knocked it free from Mason. So nice play there. And then he intercepted a 5-yard pass right in the middle of the field in 7-on-7s. 7-on-7 is not an easy place to get interceptions. The offense pretty much has their way with the defense. Obviously, the rules of physicality don't allow for the defense to go hammer the ball free with their arms the way Marlon Humphrey would tend to do in an actual game. And you just have to kind of play off and safe. And so the offense kind of has to make a little bit of a mistake, or the defense really has to make an outstanding play and sometimes both, for there to be an interception that occurs. But he had a nice interception, about 5 yards right in the middle of the field. Later in the practice, he came up limping. So he was one of the guys who Rock Ya-Sin obviously left practice, but Del'Shawn Phillips came up limping, and he returned to practice. He walked over the sideline kind of gingerly, and then seemed to kind of work it out over there, whether it might have been a cramp or whatever else it might have been, just a little turned ankle or something, and got back on the field, and he was out there again. I mentioned Arthur Mullen had an interception earlier. I talked a little bit about that and some of the recovery speed he seemed to demonstrate on that play. He also had a pass defense on a play in 7-on-7 where everybody seemed to give up. So anyway, you got just a lazy kind of a rollout, and everybody's run their route, and maybe they don't know what to do next. Of course, the Ravens have a scrambling quarterback who likes to work with extended plays. So for Arthur Mullen to get a nice, easy pass defense on such a play, not a very good look for the offense. The offense, I hope the wide receiver room, they're going to be looking at that play and saying, you know what, we got to get it together, guys. We need to keep running routes to keep trying to make space for Lamar to throw us a pass. And that's how you build trust with Lamar. So, the guy who can do that, they'll probably have a extra chance to get a ball from Lamar at a future date. So anyway, not a great look for the offense on that particular play, but a good play by Mullen. Jalen Armour-Davis, in addition to getting beat for a play where he couldn't find the ball, he was flagged for a DPI on a long pass to Aguilar, 35-yard play down the right sideline. Looked like a Torrey Smith style drawn DPI, and Torrey Smith was known for really outracing the defender by so much that when Flacco threw up a mildly underthrown ball, the defensive back would just crash through Torrey Smith and create some of the longest DPIs we'd see in the entire NFL. In fact, one year, and I think might have been Smith's rookie year, might have been 2012, he had the 3 longest DPIs drawn in the entire NFL that year, 50, 50, and 60 yards. By the way, tell me how you get a 60-yard DPI. What routes are made to hit a receiver that's 60 yards downfield as opposed to, say, 42 to 45 kind of thing, which is normal. But anyway, 60-yard DPI that year. So anyway, JAD, same thing here, ran right through Aguilar. Flag was thrown, and JAD's having a tough camp. I'm in terms of what I've seen, I haven't seen a lot to say he's moving way up the depth chart, and the Ravens really need to figure that out because it ain't Trayvon Mullen. They got Daryl Worley playing at safety. I haven't seen much of Kyu Blue Kelly. So they really need to figure out who they have at cornerback. And honestly, I think they probably need to go out and find another cornerback on the market, given what they have in-house right now. Would not surprise me if that'll happen, potentially at the end of camp. I was talking to a Commanders reporter today. He said that he thought the Commanders were really have an overflow of talent at corner. Now, there'll be a lot of teams that need corners at the end of camp, but that may be a place where the Ravens have to consider a trade. And, the Ravens have some extra depth at a couple different positions. But cornerback is definitely a place where they would need to acquire somebody. In particular, inside linebacker for the Ravens, maybe a place where they have a player to trade. Who else we got? Rashad Nichols had a pass defense at the line of scrimmage. Travis Jones had another just a few plays later. So good to see them getting their paws up and getting it well timed and whatnot. Then they finished practice with the mob loose ball drill, where groups try to separate the ball carried by one player. It used to be kind of a running through a gauntlet thing. I heard it referred to as the slip and slide drill, where you got and that may have been a case of it was done in a blocking pit before that might have made the footing more difficult for the runner. But anyway, the offensive line went against the defense, and the tight ends and running backs went against a linebacker, and the defensive backs went against the wide receivers. I didn't see anybody lose the football today. But I wasn't watching every single rep because they're split into three different groups while they're doing that. It's obviously a drill the players really enjoy. And there's a lot of shouting if somebody ever does drop the ball. And again, I might have heard it if it had happened today. Certainly in the past, I have heard it, and it's a lot of catcalls when a player drops the ball. We'll talk a little bit about the interviews here. John Harbaugh spoke to a visit by Jerry Rosburg, who was out there on the field, a very recognizable countenance there, the former special teams coach, who did some active one-on-one coaching. So you bring a guy in, and what this reminds me of is the Jets Hard Knocks from a few years ago, where they brought Joe Namath in, and they're actually liking a couple of things that Joe Namath is giving them in terms of advice. But the advice doesn't stop, and it keeps going on and on and on and on. And Joe Namath was invited into the coach's room, with the legendary status he certainly has with the Jets, and they did a very good job of capturing within the show just how much advice he was giving out. It's like places where I think you need to hold your hand under the football. When you hold your hands to the side, when the ball's coming out from under center, that's when bad things tend to happen, and you tend to accumulate some fumbles. And making sure that bottom hand is placed correctly, and all these really specific things he wanted to tell them. And you could see the rest of the group was kind of like sitting back with arms folded, listening to him. And they did a great job, as I'll say, of capturing on Hard Knocks just how it was starting to get to be too much advice from Joe Namath. Well, anyway, Jerry Rosburg, I think a very different situation. A lot of really good one-on-one advice, probably very short and to the point. He is a terse firebrand of a character. He's a firebrand on the field. We'll say, get back here. We're doing this we're redoing this rep because Tyus Bowser doesn't know what the hell he's supposed to do. He'd be very specific about the player, and he curses up a storm. Sounds like a sailor when he's leading a special teams practice. But then you bring him the microphone, and all of a sudden you have this cerebral, professorial person in front of you, and most of the answers you get are these short, quippy comebacks that don't leave you really with an answer to your question. The best answer I can give you is I got to ask a question of Rosburg shortly after there had been an error in the placement of a ball in a game against the Jets in 2016. Okay, so there's a blocked field goal. Blocked field goal went out of bounds. On such a play, the ball is returned to the spot of the kick, not the spot where the ball goes out of bounds. I asked Rosburg about it. I said, Rosburg, Jerry, the ball that went out of bounds on the block kick, Shouldn't that have been returned to the original spot of the kick as opposed to, and he said, that's what the league told us. And he's like, it gives you nothing to go on. And it's one of these things, obviously, where he didn't really want to answer the question. He probably didn't want to potentially risk a fine from the league or whatnot. But it was an interesting kind of a moment in time in terms of the typical answer you get from Rosberg and who he is on the field and how different that is from who he is at the podium. But anyway, entertaining guy and a very good coach that I'm sure the Ravens were happy to have back. Now, the next one, I'm not going to go into exactly what was said because I want you to go out and listen to the question and to Harbaugh's response, get the tenor of his voice and whatnot. But he was asked, when does Dobbins' absence start to become a concern? And I can tell you kind of in general what he said, and I'll try and paraphrase it, but I think really you want to listen to exactly what he said to get what's going on there. You may pick up some subtext yourself, but he said that he didn't know, but at some point it does, and that he talked to him last night. He says they talk often, but the fact that he's not here at some point, there's things he has to learn how to do in the offense, and they'll fall behind. Anyway, go out and listen to the thing. I think it's more important, what subtext you'll pick up from that interview than what I can tell you about exactly what words were said. And there is a saltiness that has shown up in some of Harbaugh's other comments, whether he knows it or not. So, for instance, Patrick Queen was on the stand the other day, and he was asked, Harbaugh was asked about Patrick Queen prior to Queen going to the stand, and he said he thought he'd done a good job and not let the contract affect, or his unhappiness with not getting his option picked up or a contract hurt his play on the field like some other players can let happen, kind of thing. And without, whether he intended or not as a backhanded slap to J.K. Dobbins, it is. If you're J.K. Dobbins and you're listening to that, it's the only way you can take that is he's talking about me, isn't he? And honestly, at this point, I think, obviously Harbaugh's fairly frustrated with the situation in terms of J.K. not being there. And I think he's doing about as good a job as he can in not letting that saltiness come out with every comment he makes. But I'll ask you, go listen to the interview, see what subtext you pick up on it. And, send me a note on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you in terms of here's what I heard and tell me what that is. And then Harbaugh, of course, dropped the bomb with his last comment was that Simpson will be moving back to play with the ones next week. Had a lot of praise for Saleh in terms of what he'd done. And one-on-one blocking, pass blocking drills had gone well. And he said that, we had planned this flip. So I guess it's going to be Saleh for the rest of this week. And then next week, it'll be Simpson with the ones. And this might be one of those cases where Simpson getting the second opportunity to be with the ones might actually be in a better position to do well. So we'll see how that goes in terms of the preseason games as well, where I think it'll be critical that each of them kind of gets an opportunity to play with better offensive linemen. It's easy to look bad when the offensive linemen next to you are also bad. So the Ravens are going to want to probably let each of them get some time with the best offensive line that they can. Joe D'Alessandro came to the stand next. Lots of praise for Saleh and his work ethic. Lots of praise for Linderbaum. Says he has increased confidence. And one of the interesting questions I thought was that he thinks that Linderbaum will have more responsibility for pre-snap calls if the Ravens have more audibles. So good question, by the way. I forgot. I missed who exactly asked it, but very good question in terms of what Linderbaum's responsibilities become if Lamar becomes a fairly regular audibler. One thing D'Alessandro made a very strong point about was that the blocking schemes have not changed much with Monken. He said he and Roman saw things very similarly in terms of the right way to block plays and the right way to play offensive line. And I thought that was a very interesting comment. And I'm sure it means that Monken does not really see the need for the change, because otherwise you're really going against your current offensive coordinator. I think that even if D'Alessandro really felt like Roman understood blocking a hell of a lot better than Monken did, which, by the way, that wouldn't surprise me if that were true at all. That D'Alessandris would probably still not align himself with Roman unless it was already the answer he thought Monken could live with. So I thought that was an interesting point. D'Alessandris, very down-to-earth guy. It's very hard not to like him. I asked him a question about the way he practices. He didn't give me what I would call a great answer. He didn't really get into it, but I was really wanted to ask, about half line reps and these old school, one rep at a time. What value do you get relative to other methods? And he started just going into that's how I was taught to do it. That's the way I grew up. So I don't know another way. Which is all fine, and I'm sure true. I just kind of wanted to understand what was his reasoning for doing that, as opposed to doing, say, full line reps and getting everybody involved, as opposed to everyone watching. So you can learn from either way. I certainly respect his way. He's had a fantastic record of developing offensive linemen, so I can't disagree with any of that. But anyway, very, very likable character that I think if you saw him speak on offensive line play, you'd like that. He was asked what Ben Cleveland does to get back in the left guard competition. So we're hearing Saleh and Simpson are switching. What about Cleveland? Because he's been playing right tackle the whole time. Says he just needs to play more consistently. There is no other answer for that, folks. I don't think it's obvious that Ben Cleveland's going to get back into the left guard competition at all this camp. I think we may be down to a two-man competition here. It could change to being a different two-man competition with injury. But I think basically we're down to Saleh or Simpson is going to have this job. The Ravens would probably love for Saleh to have it for the reasons I've given you earlier. And for a lot of other reasons, they'd love to have Simpson around as either a backup left guard or potentially even a backup left tackle. He definitely has the length to play left tackle. And so if that is something that we see in the preseason, I think you could take some strong portent from that the Ravens think that's a possibility sometime in 2023 if there are injuries. Ronnie Stanley next to the podium. I'm not going to say speaking of injuries, but Ronnie Stanley next to the podium said he really had doubts about ever returning to play well. Praised Saleh for his effort and smarts, and said also that he thinks he has a chance to help Saleh develop a little bit because he plays next to him and they share that relationship at least. So I think that was a good set of things. Ronnie's kind of a introverted person. It looks straightforward rather than into the eyes of the questioner a lot of the time. Which is a kind of an introverted way, I think, of speaking. If you think about people who, you sit across the table from and they don't necessarily make direct eye contact with you, there may be a lot of reasons why they do exactly that. But you kind of expect some eye contact. And I think that in Stanley's case, just even after all these years, 8 years in the league, he's just not all that comfortable at the podium. He's not bad at it, by the way, but just, hey, if public speaking is the first overall human fear and death is number 7, then we can commiserate with who Ronnie Stanley is here in terms of still not really being all that comfortable at the podium. Tyler Linderbaum, the last guy at the podium today, pretty much the answer to every one of his questions was confidence, and confidence. What's new about year 2? How do you need to take your game to the next level? All these things. The confidence was the answer to all of them. He was asked about his angry switch, which I forget if Stanley or Harbaugh had brought it up. I think Stanley must have been the one to bring it up. And he didn't really elaborate on that. And Ryan Mink tried to get him in there and tee him up with this. Did you turn on your angry switch during that Tampa Bay game? And you can see the wheels kind of turning in his head. He goes, Tampa Bay game. Like he couldn't really remember exactly what had happened during that game. But anyway, he couldn't really get very far with that. And he looks bigger. The comment has been made. I saw it from, I think it might have been Mike Preston, but it was in the Sun anyway, talking about additional bulk. He definitely looks bigger. I would say a lot of that is more weight being carried on the frame. What I am not noticing is that he has much bigger or more well-defined guns at this point. So he's probably a little bigger in the rear end and maybe in the legs and definitely in the gut. His strength hopefully has improved from last year. Honestly, I don't have a great baseline to work on, but my feeling is that he's certainly bigger than he was last year, and he hasn't yet moved all that weight to the right places. But I'm sure he will as he lifts more during the season, and as naturally you tend to work more during the season and probably lose a few pounds if you're a lineman. Typically, it becomes harder to keep that weight on as an offensive lineman. Anyway, that's it for notes today on 8/2/23. But fun day of practice again, as it always is, and lots to see. Please hit me up with comments on Twitter if you'd like to discuss any component of what happened in practice. I really want to get back into doing more of that, and I'll be around the next couple of days to take your questions, hopefully. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a film study short, hit me up. There is still time before the regular season starts. We have a lot of planned shows in terms of the camp notes, the positional reviews, the roster shows we'll do. There's a lot to do, and of course, the reviews from the preseason games. But there will still be time to fit in a couple of shorts. And if you want to, just hit me up with a DM on Twitter. Got a great idea for one today that I'm going to follow up on. And I hope you'll feel free to shoot me a DM. I will get right back to you. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.